So yes, there is a cycle of violence that takes place, especially with domestic violence. The first one that I mentioned is the building of tension. That is the number one. And so building of tension refers to if you see just, certain behaviors that are starting to change. So maybe like raising of voices. And so if you have it, because you can have a disagreement about anything in domestic violence. I mean, it can be literally you did not turn on, I asked you to turn on the stove, or it could be, it's never anything. So like we were telling you, when we say that you do not deserve the situation, we mean it. Because because I've heard a lot of women or people who have been in abusive situations say, well, maybe next time I should have just did better, right? Well, maybe if this is what making a person upset, then obviously I just need to do.
Welcome, Melissa. Thank you so much for being back on the Dalitalks show. How are you doing today? And can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. Fabulous this morning. Got a little boxing session in this morning, so I'm feeling fabulous. But to let everyone know who I am Melissa Santana from Cleveland, Ohio. I am currently a student liaison for a local community college here in Cleveland. But I'm also an advocate by trade. I care a lot about interpersonal violence as a whole. So whether that's sexual assault, whether that is interpersonal, whether that is domestic violence, whether that is stalking, all of those. Because I'm an advocate by trade, I worked for a local organization known as the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. I have also worked at a local university where I was coordinating programs for the Violence Prevention and Action Center. So care a lot about all of these things in general. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. So I asked you to come on to the Dalitalks show again to talk a little bit more about domestic violence. We kind of touched on that last time you were here, and you spoke on human trafficking. But I feel like diving in deeper into domestic violence is really, really important. Can you tell us a little bit about your background story with the domestic violence?
Absolutely. I would definitely say that domestic violence definitely holds a special place, as far as when it comes to things that I'm passionate about, just because I've seen it plague not only myself, but individuals that are closest to me. I would definitely say starting with a very, very good friend of mine who I met at an organization here. We did similar work together. And I think it's interesting that a lot of us that are doing this work really care. It comes from a place of concern because it usually hits home for us. And so it's something that is personal, and that's why we care. And for this friend of mine, she unfortunately lost her mother because her father actually murdered her mother. And so unfortunately, that was the ultimate, progression of domestic violence is pretty much what it is. And so, the risk is always there. And that's always our major concern, is that is what can happen, that a life can be lost, that we care so deeply about, and that we wish that could be prevented. That's always why we care so much about this prevention work and making sure that we don't have those casualties happen. And so that was absolutely her story. The other one is my mother. My mother was someone who was abused for her entire marriage. So she was unfortunately, beaten. She was, was cheated on. It was a lot of, unfortunately, unhealthy in pretty much every aspect you can think of. And anytime she tried to stick up for herself for maybe a transgression that she noticed her husband at the time was doing, she would get punished for it. So it was never accepting any responsibility, would always do that to her. I grew up hearing about those stories. I did not see that one. I did not see the violence firsthand, but I saw her coping with it. And so she raised me coping with alcohol. So alcohol was her vice. It was something she used. I didn't understand it at the time, though. For the longest, I definitely did resent her because I wanted her to be a mother to me. I'm like, I get that you went through all these painful things. And my brother would often tell me about that. He would always see, he did see the violence. So he would always go to her side and say like, well, no, you got to understand. She went through a lot. And I'm like, no, but I need my mom. Like, I need my mother to be here. I need her to be there for me. I have all these questions she can't answer. And I kind of felt alone a lot of times. But I have definitely learned as an adult to now see, a lot of her strength and what she was going through, and that she was trying to deal with things the best way she could, honestly. And she did give me the best opportunity she could at the time, given the situations. But it definitely was hard. And so I internalized a lot when I was a child. So it's interesting. I am very vocal now. I even have children that, like my oldest, who's like really, says anything. Anytime she has an issue, she like talks about it and she is not afraid. But so a lot of people say that she's like me, that she's like, oh, that's your little twin. And I was like, yeah, but not at that age. I actually found my voice when I was an adult, like a whole adult. Like I would even say maybe even in the middle of college. So not even like high school, I waited. I used to be really, really quiet, stick to myself, do as I was told, and a lot of that. But there were a lot of thoughts that were there. I just didn't share them out loud. And so then when it came to romantic relationships, I waited a long time to pursue them. I was very, raised Catholic. I was all strict about it. I'm like, I'm going to save myself for marriage. I was all about like, I don't want to date it. It also scares me and all that. So in high school, I would talk to some people. I did meet somebody in high school who I liked a lot, but didn't really pursue it very seriously. We kind of, did our thing as, high school students do. But in college, we talked a little bit as well. And then we got reunited years later after I had already graduated from college. And so since I knew this person, we always had this deep history. We knew each other and all that. So it was easy for us to reconnect. However, during the time that we had been apart, this person had faced a lot of trauma and so had lost an entire child, unfortunately, to pneumonia, but was actually accused, however, of having a hand in the child's death. And so when I met them or reconnected with them, that's what they were going through. So instead of realizing that they were going through a lot of trauma and maybe I should let them heal first, I saw an opportunity to help the person because I'm like, I will come to the day. I will do what I can. And unfortunately, it just really does eat away. And so now that's why I know that it's so important when you have a partnership to absolutely be there for your partner, but you don't have to be their counselor. It is okay to don't let those roles, mix. You really need to have those healthy boundaries. And so at the time I didn't have them. I didn't know what they looked like. I thought I had did everything right though, up until this point, because I had went to college. I did all these things. I saw my mother and her issues, but that's why I made sure to avoid things like that, any of those behaviors. But when our relationship turned a little bit unhealthy, I made excuses for it because when we were together, this person did propose to me. So we did end up having a marriage together, and proposal was something hard to turn down. I was like, somebody wants to spend the rest of their life with me. They love me. And so I used that to make excuses throughout. I saw red flags before we even got married, but I just talked them down. And then we ended up having children together. And so I kept saying, I really want our family to stay together. I don't want to be another one of those broken families that does not have the 2-parent household. I'm going to do whatever I can. So it helped me to make excuses when that first insult came, when the raised voices would come, when things would be thrown in our house. And when, unfortunately, it did become abusive physically as well. And so sometimes it's even hard for me to still say it now, like to be able to say out loud that like I was in that kind of situation. But it is something that I learned a lot from, and I was able to grow from later. But I know now, was something I didn't know then, is that I allowed myself to stay because I honestly didn't feel that I deserved to leave. And I had to be honest with myself about that. I really thought that this is just, this is what God gave me, that, this person loves me. I need to stay in this situation. And I didn't think that I, should leave or that I should say anything about it. And that, I believed in myself enough or had enough self-esteem to leave that situation. So eventually, once I did, I see things in a whole different light. But I totally understand why a lot of women, or just in general, because this happens to men as well, why they stay in those situations. And it's not easy for them to just say, oh, let's just, leave that or leave it behind. And because of that, a lot of society tends to place the blame on victims as well and make it seem like it's always about them and why they couldn't leave a situation, instead of putting the focus on the abuser and why it is that they're, inflicting this abuse on other people. And so for me, I did face that. I had that happen. It was abusive throughout even my pregnancies. So unfortunately, like I had it even when I was carrying a baby. I remember going to the hospital once, and because I wanted to check on the baby, I wasn't even concerned about me. I was more about the kids. And I said, I remember they asked that quintessential question, like, are you safe to go home? And I said, yes, lying, because I just wanted to make sure the baby was okay. And just doing all of those things. And then also my breaking point, which is interesting to me too, is that it also wasn't me. It was one day when we had an argument and things were thrown. And I remember, like, it was about our marriage. I had said something about like, well, you don't need to have your ring or something. And the ring was thrown. And so things were thrown there. And I remember that because our children were home and my daughter saw it, that's when I had my breaking point. And that's what actually gave me the courage to leave that situation. So I can understand why some people who might not even have that's what it took for me. My kids actually saved my life. And so that some people don't even have that, that catapults them into that situation. And so it makes it easier for them to stay. But that was the day I decided that I had enough and that I didn't want my children to grow up thinking that was normal.
Wow, there's so much you just talked about that I want to kind of go back into. So I've spoken with people who have experienced domestic violence in the past, and I continue to see a pattern. And you kind of mentioned that pattern. And I want to touch on this because I feel like it's important for people who might not realize that they are going through domestic violence or that they're being abused in any type of way. So you mentioned that there was trauma, whether it was a one person or both. I would like to say, and excuse me if I'm wrong, that both of you have experienced trauma because you saw as a child domestic violence. And when we see something in our home, it almost becomes a norm. Or we might know that it's wrong, but it's also somehow normal for us. The other thing is he was going through a grieving process and he was being accused as well. And that's traumatic. I guess the trauma is definitely there. And you also mentioned that you wanted to support him, but you also became his counselor. And that is so important to discuss. And my question about that is, what do you think is the line between support and being a counselor to someone?
I definitely think that, yes, that I'm glad that, like you said, it's a good distinction to make. I think, and then it's very interesting because I'm currently pursuing a career in counseling now. So it's that I decided, I'm like, well, now I will make sure that I make it my professional career and all of that. But I think that when you are in a supportive relationship and a healthy one, because I love talking about red flags, but my other thing is I love talking about green flags and those signs of a healthy relationship. And it's that, negotiation and communication and all those things. I think that in order to be a supportive partner, you can absolutely be there for your partner and allow them to vent to you, allow them to share their feelings, validate their feelings and do things like that. But when it comes to providing coping mechanisms, when it comes to giving them techniques, that is not something that you can necessarily provide. And I don't think you should. I think it puts you in an unfair place to be giving levels of expertise that you don't necessarily have. And also that you shouldn't necessarily have to explore in a marriage or in any kind of partnership. I think that you should be free to be with one another and love one another, not to try to be analyzing or helping or critiquing one another in that way.
Oh, I love that you said that. I thank you so much for explaining it that way because it can be kind of difficult for some people to decipher, okay, am I being supportive or am I being the counselor? But you said a key word, unfairness. And I absolutely agree. We, the supporting partners, shouldn't have to take in that role because that's a big burden. And in a way, whatever result comes out of your attempt to counsel somebody, sometimes that blame, if it fails or if it doesn't go right, it can come back on you. You also mentioned some of the signs were the feeling of something or someone familiar. I think you said that before we started recording, but you said that earlier that was one of the things that you had gone to counseling, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and how this was revealed to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So glad you brought that up. Yes, I definitely am a fan, obviously, of counseling as well. And so, and I went pursuing answers because at this time, as I did mention, was that I had went to college and I did all these things. So I thought that up until this point, I had been doing everything to put myself on a path to success. I wasn't really understanding why this didn't line up with that. Like, why didn't this go with my theory of, what I was doing? My counselor asked me a very pivotal question as to why do you think that you even were attracted or even fell in love with this person? And I had no answer for her. I thought that it was like, because I am in love, because I care about them. And I thought it was just that simple. She let me know, however, that it was something familiar to you. And this reminded you of your childhood. You went back to something that was a familiar pattern. And that is actually why you were attracted to him. And that is why you went back to that. And for me, that was definitely mind blowing because I didn't realize up until that, especially because for me, the person that faced abuse was my mother. So I'm not equating romantic relationships with a woman. And so I'm thinking like, or my caretaker really, because that could have been my father as well, but just a caretaker. But you really see the childhood really is everything. And that a lot of your roots can absolutely have an impact later.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. The other thing that you mentioned is the education part. You were in college, you're educated. And do you think that at any point you thought, well, I couldn't possibly be in a domestic violence situation. Not only do I know about it, but I'm an educated woman. I should know better, right?
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. I think that, and then what's interesting for me is that that's why I also relate so much to the friend that I kept mentioning who also lost her mother. We talk about that all the time. It is so easy for us to be distracted. And so when we have these things going on and for us not to see our own, like how much healing we need to focus on in and of ourselves. But that is absolutely why. For me, I was like, no, because I have done all of these things and all of that, it definitely made it easier to make the excuses for sure. And honestly, in college, I hadn't been aware as much of violence as I did outside of it. So then once I learned about it, what was interesting was I was actually working for an organization, the Rape Crisis Center, when I was in my marriage. Wow. And as I was learning more about the interpersonal violence, like danger assessments and things like that, the wheel started turning, to be honest. And so it helped me, but it was a lot for me to take in at the time to say like, wow, I actually feel like my partner has a lot of these behaviors. Am I in an abusive situation? Could be me because I'm helping other people. So those who can do and who can't teach. So I thought that that's what it was. And I did think that it was a way for me, but it was actually something personal for sure.
Wow, that's crazy because you know what? So I've never been in a domestic violence relationship, but I saw my father, be abusive to my mother for years until he left. And that creates a little bit of like paranoia in children or anybody who goes through it, because your next relationship, you're wondering like, oh my gosh, am I not seeing it again? Is this whatever? And I remember going through like Teen Magazine, Elle Magazine, Vogue, whatever, and they had the little quizzes. And when I was dating a guy, I would use those darn quizzes. I'm like, am I in one? And I was like, and is this accurate? Because I was so worried of following the same trend as my mom. I didn't know what the word generational trauma or generational abuse meant back then. I didn't even know that word existed, but I knew that it happened a lot because when you grow up in an environment where this is a norm, you look around and you think, oh my gosh, is that going to be me? I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for my children or whoever, if I ever have any. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's so important. Like that you were actually in a center that helped women. And in a way, it's like, thank goodness that you did, because do you think that you would have really found out or accepted the fact that you were in one of those relationships had you not worked at that place?
To be honest, probably not. I think that I would have not, like you said, had the language that I needed to interpret it, to make sense of it, and to really then not only deal with it, but then to, heal from it and move past it. So I think that it gave me those tools that I needed. And it honestly gave me a really great friend of mine. I think that these things too, these are where I think the universe responds. And I think that, if you believe in a higher power, I think that things work out for good. And so when you're able to put yourself in these better situations and be able to put yourself in a path where you can meet people that can help you on your journey, they can definitely save your life. And I think that was another thing that was helpful for me. But had I not had that, I agree. And it's because of everything you said. So I appreciate that you also mentioned how it can manifest itself with children, because I think that's the other thing is that I know parents are listening. And as a fellow parent, my heart always goes out with that. Because yes, that is why sometimes when we see these changes in our, children's behavior and all of that, they're letting us know that there are situations that are, unrest. And for me, what was interesting, as I had mentioned, I was quiet. So you wouldn't know necessarily that there was all these things going on. But thankfully, I did have teachers when I was growing up, one of which I am still in contact with. She was my second grade art teacher. Wow. Still talks to me to this day, but she noticed it. So she noticed like that it wasn't necessarily something normal and that there might be something more happening there.
Wow, that's amazing. It's teachers, they do so much aside from educating our children, right. But they can be literally somebody's hero. So I'm glad that person was in your life. There's another thing that you mentioned. The breaking point was not me; it was the kids. I see this all the time because I remember thinking back in my, with my experience, going through what my mom, watching what my mom went through. I remember telling her mom, just leave him. And I remember saying like, I'd rather live under a bridge than to live with this man here again. And her fear was not being able to provide for us because she was an immigrant, didn't speak English. She didn't have an education because he made her drop out of her first semester of college. He never allowed her to work. So she was financially disabled. So like you said, not everybody has the courage to leave because of the kids. But I want to point out here that mothers are so selfless sometimes. Like they will do whatever, whether it's withstand the abuse in order to provide for their kids, or leave him or her or whoever the partner is to be able to provide for the kids. It's like the total opposite of the spectrum. It's incredible. And regardless of what choice you make, I want women who are going through, or men who are going through this domestic abuse, to not blame themselves, because I think that there's a lot of blame that goes on after. In hindsight, you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, I allowed all of this to happen and my kids had to go through that and whatever. But the point is that, I know that you do it from love. And I just want to make sure that you point that out, because you know what, I'm going to admit, I was that resentful kid. I was that resentful kid that was like, why, my childhood was just rude. I'm a like drama queen. Like, it's all about me. But when you're a kid, that like, it's all about you. Yeah. So, but if you are that parent listening right now and your child, it was that selfish little kid like me saying what me, please forgive yourself. Or forgive your child too, because they're just trying to process that. And it's really, really difficult. The other question I want to ask you is, do you think that he knew that he was abusive at any point before, during, or after?
I would say at the time, no. When it was in the middle of it, I honestly don't think so. I think that I saw a lot more of, it was just, I'm just dealing with my day to day. This is just how I am. I'm just reacting and I am doing what I, need to do. Because we have actually had conversations since. We still have children together. And so I think that a lot more of the processing did take place afterward. But I have seen others who do know, and unfortunately just don't stop it. They honestly don't have the coping mechanisms they need, to be honest. And I think that, like you said, that identification is really what's key for anything. So I think like when it comes to addictions, when it comes to any kind of behavior that needs to be changed, if you cannot identify it, you will not be able to change it. So you need to know that it's there to begin with. And no, I don't think that he definitely knew that that's what it was. And also, at times I could see the battle. There were times where he absolutely apologized. So I could tell that he was trying. And that's what made it also easy, because if you know about domestic violence, there is a cycle. And so there is a building of tension. Then there is the blow up. There is an apology, and then it goes back. And so that's where I stayed. I noticed that there were cycles in our relationship, but I didn't necessarily know that I was helping them to continue. I just thought like, okay, was this how relationships are? I guess you just have good times and then you have bad times. Like, is it always meant to be like this? But I just kept thinking that the apology was enough for me to think that maybe there was going to be some change later, but not realizing that because no change behavior came with it, that's why I needed to go. So it took me some time to make sense of that.
Would you repeat the cycle, please, and maybe give us some more examples so that people who are listening can analyze and assess?
Absolutely. So yes, there is a cycle of violence that takes place, especially with domestic violence. The first one that I mentioned is the building of tension. That is the number one. And so building of tension refers to if you see just, certain behaviors that are starting to change. So maybe like raising of voices. And so if you have it, because you can have a disagreement about anything in domestic violence. It could be literally you did not turn on, I asked you to turn on the stove, or it could be, it's never anything. So like we were telling you, when we say that you do not deserve the situation, we mean it. Because because I've heard a lot of women or people who have been in abusive situations say, well, maybe next time I should have just did better, right? Well, maybe if this is what making a person upset, then obviously I just need to do what I can do to not make them upset. No, ma'am, because unfortunately what is the case is that they're going to get upset anyway. And honestly, even if you try, they're going to find another reason to get upset, because that is the state of mind that they are in. So it has nothing to do with you, and you're not doing anything wrong. You deserve to be in a healthy situation. But in the tension building, it happens like that. And so sometimes we also see domestic violence as these really overt things, like throwing things and things like that. It can also just be someone standing in your doorway, and not letting you leave, or just blocking your path, or it could be things like that. But the tension building is definitely step one. Step two is then the blow up. So it can be some kind of eruptive factor. And sometimes it's not just you. So maybe they do hit you, you know, and physically put their hands on you, but they might damage your property as well, right? And so it might be your cell phone, they destroy it. It could be your car. It could be, you know, anything in your house, things of that nature, but it's definitely some eruption. But then that honeymoon phase that we're talking about, the apology, that's the third step that I was mentioning. That one is so big because it can be really flashy. And so some abusers are really good at being charming. And so it can be like roses at your job, or it could be like this really nice card, or, you know, look at me, I really care about you because I didn't mean to do that. And so I will not do that again. If you stay with me, I will let you know that it won't happen and we will be good. I'm choosing you. And so all of these words are so powerful, especially when it's coming from somebody that you love and care about, or like Dali was mentioning, who helps you pay your bills, who is who might be the parent to your children. It's hard for you to walk away from those things, but it's all part of the cycle. And then it starts over.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for describing those. I feel like it's really important to give those examples because sometimes people don't really see it. So thank you for being very descriptive about it. My other question is, because you said that you work for a center that helped people. Some people are afraid to go to the centers for many different reasons, especially right now. With this pandemic, there are so many people stuck at home with their abusers. A lot of them have different circumstances. Like some might be undocumented immigrants. So they fear that they're going to be deported if they reach out and get some help. Some might be abused by somebody who has like maybe some kind of legal issue. So can you educate us a little bit about how involved do the centers get, and when you would or would not report, certain circumstances?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question because yes, there are national hotlines that are available for people and national resources, and then there are local. And so I want to speak to both. And so in my case, I know that in Cleveland, Ohio, for example, we do have a domestic violence and actually we happen to have a child advocacy center. So speaking again to the parents that might be listening, we understand that children have separate needs. And so there is for us, we have an entire center dedicated to just children and helping them as well. And so we have that. The Cleveland Rape Crisis Center was another one that I mentioned. And so, but all of these, they have hotlines. And on the hotlines, I can, when I was there, this was actually a volunteer part of my position, but I loved it, was that I actually worked the hotline. So I can tell you firsthand that it is absolutely anonymous. No one ever knew that I was the person receiving, that was on the other end of the call. I just knew contact information about them, and I got only as much as they were willing to give. The main change that we had been implemented was that now there are ways to help them set up appointments. So again, if you want to give contact information, you can. But I will let you. What I want to speak to directly is the undocumented. I completely understand. That is a very big concern. I would totally get that. That would definitely make me not want to hit any, to contact anyone if I felt that that's what was going to happen. I can definitely tell you from experience, at least from the organizations I worked for, that's not the focus. It is absolutely not the focus. What they really want to do is connect you to services. So they're absolutely not going to get any identifying information in that way that is going to connect you or expose you. They just want to make sure you are safe. I remember also what I really appreciated about the organizations I worked for is that, and that I'm still connected to, is that they also have translating services. So if you also do not speak the language, they'll pay for that. You know what I mean? This is all part of it. They just want to make sure that you get the help you receive. I did. And it was not only for Spanish. I remember I spoke to somebody who spoke an African language. I had no idea, but there are World Bank, and all world translators who do this, and they will pay. They have the services available to do it. So please don't let anything be a barrier. And please know that when you contact, if I would say if there's any step one, right? If you're thinking like, well, this sounds like a lot, I don't know where to begin, even just calling the hotline, just having a conversation. I would say just try it because you will see. And you are able to use whatever language you need on that call, but knowing that somebody there trusting will answer.
Wow. Thank you. So when you say, you collect information, so what is not normal? Like, should they be asking for your social security number, your date of birth, or, what kind of information do you?
Right. I'm so glad you brought that up because Absolutely not. I never had to ask for a social security number. If somebody asked you for that, I would definitely question why they needed that information. Whenever I completed an intake with anyone, I needed to have like their name, for example, and I might ask you for date of birth because I do want to know like how old you are and be able to connect that to a file that I might create. And if you're interested in services, yes, I might ask you for your address for follow-up if that's something that is okay with you. But the other thing is we actually have programs that will help you if you want to make your address anonymous. This is definitely something that we also provide. So this is a service. It's like Home Haven, I believe, but it's an entire program. And so it's through the Attorney General's office. You can actually have your address become anonymous. So we understand that some people who are in abusive situations, that might be the case. That is also a service that you can do. So, and for some, that's all they wanted. They did not necessarily want the therapy. They were just trying to, because they were in the midst of moving, they were trying to figure things out. We can help with that. And so that's what's helpful is providing that kind of info so we can follow up and make sure we're addressing the need that you have. But no, absolutely not. If you're getting a social security number, or we're not doing taxes, so we do not need information in that way.
Right. Got it. Yeah. Actually, that's such a good, I'm so glad I asked about that because there are people who might be thinking, well, if I call, they're going to ask for my social. And right. I might not want to give it for whatever reason. But so here's another random question that just popped in my head. So if, say, there is an 18-year-old high school student, technically at 18, you're an adult. But if you're still in high school, dating a 19-year-old or another 18-year-old who is abusing this person, are there any differences in the legal matter, how it works? Is that 18-year-old in high school still considered a child, although they're still in high school, but then again, they're still 18?
Right. I would definitely say that, yes, it can get very tricky when it comes to that. Usually 18, however, is considered an adult for situations. And this is especially true when it comes to things like sexual assault, for example, too, because we have ages of consent. So I think that's where it comes into play. But what's interesting is that the one that always disheartens me is domestic violence, because we don't have current laws in place. What really makes me mad is because, yes, we talked about, all these other ones before, is that sexual assault, it's also an issue that's, we're dealing with that and all that, but at least rape is considered a federal crime. Mm-hmm. What really pains me is that domestic violence is not. It's not considered a federal crime. It can literally be considered a misdemeanor. Yeah. And I've actually seen as a result, many perpetrators get away with probation, to be honest, even with all this evidence, but they didn't, unfortunately, if they can't tie it to the person or things like that. So yes, but I think that what I have seen absolutely is that 18, yes, is considered adult and you're under a certain system. And that minors definitely do follow different situations as a result of that, but that overall we need a lot more work when it comes to domestic violence and protecting those who have that, including with protection orders and with things like that as well, that we have room to grow for sure in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. Are there any other tips or clues or resources that you want to share for people who might need the help?
Absolutely. Well, I would definitely say that. And overall, just to, it takes an average of 7 times for a person to leave a domestic violence situation. And so we just want to make sure that knowing that, just having that kind of information, if whether you're the person that's in the domestic violence situation or you're helping someone else, just try to provide as much as you can, just support, because that person definitely needs the support. Even if they're not in a position where they're ready to express that, they definitely want it. They just might not be able to. And to be honest, too, if they're in the abusive situation and they know their abuser might be listening or might be, hearing anything that they're saying, they're not going to be able to be as upfront with you as they would like to be. So I wouldn't see that as an invitation to then not speak to them or like not provide support, but just know to be able to do it at the right time. So don't take it personally when someone does that, because they're in a very delicate situation and they're trying to make sense of it as much as they can. But I think that I just want to remind everyone that, yep, there are a variety of services that are available. There are emergency shelters that are available as well. There's all these, and there's so many people willing and ready to help with wherever you're at and with whatever you want. And so I would definitely say, please don't be afraid to do it. But at the same time, if you are, we totally get why. We totally get it. And as you have heard from someone like myself, I've been there before. And so I can totally, empathize at least in that way. But I get that we all have our separate journeys. And whenever we're all ready, we will do that at that time. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is never too late to choose yourself and to want to do what you can. But please know that if you do it, you do not ever have to do it alone. I also feel that that is what an abuser often says. And that is another part of domestic violence that I didn't even touch on. But mental manipulation is also huge. But as a result of that, we want to give you the opposite message and let you know that regardless of what they're saying, that's not the truth. You do have value. You do deserve to be in a healthy relationship. You do deserve to be valued for everything that you have. You have your own inherent value and you are on your path, but you are allowed to have happiness at the end of the day, whatever that looks like for you. So that
Absolutely.
is more what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you so much. More stuff keeps popping into my head, so I'm going to keep asking more questions. But something that some people always mention is, where was the family here? Why didn't family members step in? So can you speak on that, on what you've seen?
Yes, absolutely. So because even for me, I think that's what's interesting is that, so even when I was in my unhealthy situation, mind you, as mentioned, I didn't have a mother that was entirely present. So and it actually, even when I broke up finally with my ex-husband, I remember that my mother actually asked, well, did he cheat on you? And so it was right. And I'm like, oh, that's the only transgression, that can happen for somebody to walk away from a situation. And so that's what I realized is that unfortunately, some people just don't know. And so no, domestic violence alone is a very good reason to leave. And even if it's not violent, even if it is just the mental, and all that, that's still a very big enough reason, to go. But I think that that's part of it. But I think what's also interesting, especially with the marriage, is that I was married and I was living with this person in a whole separate house. So unless they came and saw, they wouldn't necessarily know. But what was interesting is that when they did come, it did look great to the outside world. I even had friends of mine who told me, I didn't know you were in an abusive situation. I mean, you kind of kept to yourself. I knew that was happening, but you didn't really say. And then I had others who said they had noticed red flags, but they didn't know how to tell me. So I was still getting stories even after that. I kind of noticed that this was a little bit off, but I didn't know if maybe that was just your normal, if you were with it. And I also didn't know how you would receive the information, which is all true. I probably wouldn't. I don't think that I would have necessarily been ready. I probably would have wrote it off, or I would have just said, that's fine, but I know what I'm doing. And so I think that, that helps that situation. But so that's another thing that, you're reminding me too, is that isolation is big. And so abusers definitely use that tool. And so they might cut off your communication to others. They definitely might say things like, you don't need to have as many friends as you have because, I love you. And so spend your time with me. And so unfortunately, it eliminates your sources of support little by little. And so then you start to get all your validation from just the person you're with. And so it makes it easier for you to accept anything that they're doing, even if it isn't something you should be having.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for mentioning those signs of isolation. That's very, very common that I've seen. And even if it's not moving you away from your family, right? It's also taking up your time so that they're spending more time with you than you spending time with somebody else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so hard for people to see it so clearly, because most of the abuse happens so subtly, so undercover. It seems like they're just private or so in love or just, that's their thing. But then underneath it all, there's something totally, totally different.
Yes.
The other thing that I want to talk on is about the shame. That's why I remember my mom wouldn't really want to speak to anyone. And she almost felt like she preferred not having friends because she would be embarrassed to be humiliated or spoken to by my father a certain way in front of her friends. Can you talk a little bit on that aspect?
Absolutely. Lord, that's the part that, right? I'm just my mind is already in a whole different place with that. And I'll say it from, personal experience. I would definitely say that for me, I felt that as well. I definitely don't, and I get what also happens is because, again, we said that language is so powerful. We get that when you say things like domestic violence or he hit me or something like that, we know that we have that thought that somebody's going to look at you differently, because of that. And so, or that their judgment is going to follow, or that they're going to think, so many different things. But the thing is, if you are in that situation or anything like that, you not sharing it ends up being more harmful for you though, because unfortunately now you're not only are you dealing with the situation, but now you don't have anyone else because you're too afraid to say anything to that person. And I can definitely tell you that was my experience. And so it allowed that experience to go on for way longer than it should have. I think that if I would have been more vocal, and I get why, I totally get why. I not only was it the shame, but it was also, I didn't have the words. I didn't necessarily have the words to put to it. And, for the longest time, which is also why my heart goes out to all those who are survivors, is that I really didn't think it was abuse, for a while. So like when I was in the middle of it, I really did think that, no, it is how relationships are. And so for a long time, not having made that connection made it easier for me to stay in that situation. But I just want to, be able to say that I can tell you that nobody feels more, like embarrassment or shame than myself. I mean, I have 3 daughters. I know I didn't say that at the beginning, but so when I decided to leave at the time, I had all 3 of them. If anybody can tell you that, was that an easy decision? No, it is not. I mean, it is all the time. I am like, it would be so much easier to have stayed or to have, made this work. But there are 3 daughters that I want them to experience genuine love. And I know that if I really wanted to teach them that, if I really wanted to live in that way, I don't care if we end up having, losing it all, but as long as they have me and they have that. And I think that was another beautiful thing you said earlier too about children, and they're just trying to figure it out. I think that, yeah, most of the time children just want to be loved. And so I think that there is a perfect way to do that. I think that whatever you can do just to let them know you're there and that you're trying, they appreciate it. I'm happy to apologize to my children all the time if I do wrong, if I do get upset, which still happens. I let them know. I take a moment to myself, I come back, and we do have a restorative conversation because we are human beings trying to figure it out together in these different stages, and we're allowed to, be open and honest about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. I know that it's hard to share these details, although I know that you appear just fine, but I know that you're still human. You still feel these things. So I'm very grateful that you're sharing this. Lastly, I want to ask, if somebody is watching right now and they're thinking, okay, I'm going to do it, what advice would you give them as far as planning?
I would definitely say that if you are in an abusive situation, is to have what's called a safety plan. This is also something that I discuss a lot about. And if you have no idea what that is, we are happy to help you with that. That is definitely something that I helped a lot of women with, especially when it comes to domestic violence, just because what we understand about domestic violence is that there are ties, and that person probably is not only just whether or not you're ready to leave, but if they're going to let you go, to be honest. So we know that too, they can make it incredibly difficult for you to leave. And that's also something that I'm glad that this question is allowing me to say, that that's also a big piece of it. And so I absolutely have worked with many survivors in the past on those things. And what I mean by a safety plan is it's basically an exit strategy as to, steps that you're going to take to be able to leave that situation. So who it is that you're going to call, literally how you would exit the house, what items you're going to take with you, things like that. And so, but even if that sounds overwhelming, like what I would say is also just reaching out to someone that can help you to create it. So if you're hearing that and you're like, I'm not in the headspace for that. I just know I'm ready to go, but I don't have that. Just reach out to somebody that can help you walk you through those steps, because there are individuals like myself who I have done that day in, day out. And I would be more than happy to walk you through those steps. And I would do most of the legwork for you. All you would need to do is allow me to ask you those questions and help you walk you through each step.
Thank you so, so much. I just want to say, you are amazing. You're so strong. And I know that we all as parents, we're so hard on ourselves. And I know that you said you're willing to apologize to your girls, but honestly, I don't think you're even going to need to do that, because you have shown your girls self-love, which is so important, so that they don't end up committing, like the mistake of choosing somebody because they're confused about what self-love means. That's one of the things I tell my girls. Like, if you love yourself, you will not tolerate, abuse of any type from anyone, whether it's a professional relationship, some friends, or a romantic relationship. The other thing is too that you mentioned. The other thing that you mentioned is that there are a lot of people that that experience domestic abuse and don't understand or don't know it. So I wanted to take note that I've read that on, I think, the National Coalition for Domestic Violence. It said that on average there's 20 people per minute that are physically abused by an intimate partner. And so that equates to about 10 million women and men. I know that it's higher for women to experience the rate of abuse, but men do actually experience it too. And you know what? Something that you mentioned earlier, that you don't understand why domestic violence, it's not punished the same as other crimes are. That too drives me insane because, I'm like, oh, if the laws were tougher, then, X, Y, and Z wouldn't have happened to me or to my mom or to other people that I've known. And it's crazy because here we are in a pandemic. We have 200, well, I can't remember exactly what the numbers are because I've stopped watching the news for so long now. But I think the last number I saw of the deaths of people who've died, from COVID was around 400,000. And it's called a pandemic. But you have 10 million people yearly dying from domestic violence, and we're not taking enough action. So I want to invite our viewers, our listeners, to take action from home at the smallest level by being supportive, by challenging yourself to not be stereotyping people who are going through that, and instead to not be judgmental, because that's what makes it so much harder. To not shame people, to not blame them, instead be a lending hand, be a resource, or share a resource. And if you want to make an impact at the legislative level, use the power of your voice to call a legislator and say, hey, I feel like this should be done. So when you call legislators, I always tell people, don't just call to complain, call to provide a solution, an idea, because that's what they need. And the more we are actively using our voice, the more likely it is that we will see some change. And it does take time, but just because it takes time and you don't see the change immediately doesn't mean that we should just throw our hands up and not do anything at all.
Right.
So yeah, but that's my gibberish.
I agree.
Thank you. Do you have any last resources or anything else you want to leave us with before we close?
Well, and I'm sure we can provide these, but so as mentioned, there are the National Domestic Violence Center hotlines that are available. There are usually local organizations that you can reach out to. And a lot of the things that we heard of, if you ever want to follow up with either of us about any of them, even if you did just have, a general question, I welcome that. And I think that just having that, I always want you to feel encouraged to get more information than less, right? And just, encourage you to just have that, but please do. And I just also want to echo what Dali said about, let's have these more genuine conversations about it, because it is hard. It is really hard for people, and I don't think we need to make it any worse, for other people and make them feel that it's bad when they're trying their best, and we all just want these simple things like love and happiness. And it's really hard when the person that we think we're going to get that from shows us this, and it reminds us of something that might have happened to us before. So if you can do your part in it, whatever that is, it's never anything too small when you're trying to help someone else.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Melissa, since you have so much knowledge, you have so many resources, if people want to get a hold of you, where can they reach out?
Currently, you can get a hold of me. All of my social media channels are the same. Thankfully, I'm able, whether that's Clubhouse, Twitter, and Instagram it's so LA_PENSATIVA, which in Spanish is Pensativa 88. And so that's currently there. And I would love for you to follow me there, because I am in the process of actually starting some new ventures. So the plan is actually to, create some workshops and all these things in the future. So I would love to give you first updates. And if you follow me there, you'll know about them first. Yes.
Wonderful. Oh, I can't wait to learn about the workshops. I can see you creating a whole bunch of them because you have so much knowledge. And I love your stories. I mean, unfortunately you lived through it, so you do have that real raw story to share, but I know that it can be very healing and helpful to so many others. So thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll see you a third time, right? So we can talk about a totally different topic.
Yep, we got to spread them out.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Melissa. I hope that you were able to learn a lot from that conversation with Melissa. There's so much more to learn about domestic violence, about signs and everything. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we realized we didn't mention were the different type of stages of domestic violence depending on age range. And we will be probably doing a whole nother conversation about that later on. But ultimately, what we want you to know is that there is help out there for you. Because unfortunately, people take advantage of our situations, our vulnerability, and the circumstances. So please reach out to Melissa if you want to coordinate some kind of workshop with your community or with your family, with your organization. And if you're in that situation, make a plan because you deserve a safe life. You deserve love, and you deserve to live in an environment where you can be at peace. Know that you are loved, even if some people are critical of you. They're probably just being critical because they're frustrated about seeing you in a certain situation and they want to be able to reach out but don't know how to. If you like this video, please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and click that little bell so that you are alerted every time a new video is published. And if you are watching on any of the other social media outlets, make sure you follow me. My handle is @Dalitalks everywhere on social media. And if you want more insights, please subscribe to my newsletter at dalitalks.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.